There are a few things that make a great Survivor-like game. The game should have great visuals and should have minor hiccups in terms of frame rate, especially when there's a lot of things on screen. It should have interesting bosses or mini-bosses to keep you engaged for the entire run. And lastly, it should have a good and interesting weapon system. And hopefully, these weapons interact with one another in some way, shape, or form. Nerd Survivors checks off quite a few of those boxes. After roughly 7.5 hours and getting my fair share of unlocks, I feel like I've seen a lot of what there is. The nerdy aesthetic fits well with the weapons and characters. As a result, I may, on occasion, find myself coming back and checking off a few more of those boxes as I go on more and more runs. Nerd Survivors plays like most games in the genre. You start off with fairly basic stats and you try to survive as long as possible. You look for chests to get better items and you level up your character, you beat bosses, or you die and repeat. Along the journey, you'll come across gold, which can be used to purchase more characters or permanent stat upgrades. Yet, despite being very similar to other games of the genre, surviving the 20-minute mark seemed more difficult than I felt in most games. In this instance, it was a good thing, as it left me wanting to start up the next one right afterwards. Intermittently, you'll have to fight a boss, each of whom have their own distinct attack patterns. Some just walk towards you, while others have giant warning marks on the map that you must avoid while trying to continue hitting the bosses. There are some great weapons, such as iconic magic missiles, every gamer's favorite choice of food, pizza, and even the ability to throw your other friends around. I may have mentioned that the game does the Survivor-like genre well, but I'll highlight a couple of standout features. For starters, I mentioned that the challenge is here in spades. As someone who's played their fair share of games of the genre, I found myself getting overwhelmed and being more cautious with my movement, especially against bosses that had giant attack patterns. This was even after I had permanently upgraded my stats in several departments. Another thing that I want to note here is that I felt interested in exploring the entire map, as almost everything is destructible and everything seems to drop gold. Lastly, you can unlock prototype weapons that allow you to modify their stats. After doing so, you can then create a special custom weapon that can be found in-game. I thought this was a pretty original idea that it deserves some spotlight. Now, covering some issues that I had. The first and probably biggest was that there's no real synergies that I was able to find in my playtime. I oftentimes ended up finishing levels before I found them if they were there. If I missed them, the reason is probably because I would only have the final boss left before I maxed out my skills. Considering that this is a big thing in a lot of Survivor-like games, it was an auto mission to have. The other thing that I should mention is the meta progression can feel kind of slow. There are only 3 worlds and 3 levels in each, and the jump from one level feels like a big leap in terms of progression that you need if you have hopes of surviving. I often found myself thinking that, well, it may be easier to just clear easier levels and get the gold that I need before I tried out the harder ones. Those are really the only major complaints that I had with the game. I would say that Nerd Survivors is worth checking out at $2.99. You can easily find yourself getting your money's worth. There's tons of things to do and unlock, even if it does take you a while to get there. The game is not going to revolutionize the genre, but it does more than a serviceable job at doing what it should. The nerdy aesthetic isn't overwhelming or get in the way of the experience, and seeing the screen fill with different attacks as you end a level is a level of satisfaction that few genres can replicate. No major frame rate hiccups and an interesting mechanic that allows you to create your own items, I think, make it worth checking out. It's available on both Android and iOS, and if you have any recommendations for me to review, leave them in the comments section below. Otherwise, stay tuned in to Gaming in the Moment.